With a mocking smile, he placed one hand on my shoulder and, holding me tight, bared my throat with the other, saying as he did so, "First, a little refreshment to reward my exertions." I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I didn't want to hinder him. I suppose it is part of the horrible curse that such is, when his touch is on his victim. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Has there ever been a time when we humans were not fascinated by monsters? Every culture's stories are saturated with darkness and menace. Vampires, werewolves, changelings, ghosts, incubi, succubi. So what if our obsession with the monstrous were about more than just the drama of the macabre? What if the creatures we most fear are not enemies at all, or even threats, but heralds or helpers? And if that's the case, how can we use their messages to better our lives? My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a therapist turned author and co-creator of the Betwixt app, and I'm here to explore the strange, beautiful and terrifying world of monsters, not just as characters in stories, but as archetypal symbols of our inner worlds and the shadow self. Why? Because what these eerie messengers have to say can empower us more than you might ever have imagined. We humans, it seems, have a fundamental need for monsters. We are drawn to them, fascinated by them, and if you take them away from us, we will find a way to create them back into our worlds. During the West's Age of Enlightenment, that is, the 17th and 18th centuries, the Church took a stand against what it saw as an unsavoury fixation on the grotesque, and it all but erased the monsters that had up until that point saturated literature and storytelling. But the people of the time didn't just abandon their fascination with monsters as the Church had intended. Instead, they projected their need onto unsuspecting human targets, labelling people as witches, vampires or werewolves. This led, of course, to the witch trials and the death of between 30 and 60,000 people, mainly women, in Europe and America. Thankfully, the literary monster made a comeback in the late 19th century with the infamous Gothic beasts of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Our monster lust has an interesting genesis. In his book Monsters, David D. Gilmore traces the first appearance of monsters back to the dawn of human civilization. Though there are records of monster-like cave paintings that predate this point in our history, by and large, monsters came onto the scene at the same time as social order. As Gilmore explains, art historian Heinz Mode, quote, argues that visual portraits of menacing creatures occur precisely at the same time as does literacy, and that consciousness of such ideas, as far as archaeology can tell, occurs as a product of the earliest known civilizations in the period of around 3000 BC. So it seems almost as if monsters serve as some kind of cosmic balancing device, or perhaps as idealized society's evil twin or shadow self. Monsters function as a reminder of what we should fear and avoid, as a metaphorical means of teaching us about evil and sin. Compounding this idea, the words monster and demonstrate or demonstrate have the same etymological root in the Latin word monstrum, which means divine omen or portent. The word monstrum, in turn, is derived from the verb monere, meaning to warn or advise. So the idea of learning from monsters about what it means to be human is no modern flight of fancy or indulgent over-intellectualization. It is, perhaps, what monsters were always meant for. To view this idea through a psychological lens, we can see that monsters are archetypal, and as such, they speak to us on a deep instinctual level about both the inner and outer world. Those who aren't familiar with the term archetype may think of human characters when they first hear the word. The magician, the mother, the artist, the child. But archetypes aren't limited to the humanoid or even the animate. In fact, some of the most pervasive and evocative archetypal motifs that show up in our dreams, myths, stories, etc. are non-human. The ocean, the mirror, the forest, storms, fire, light, darkness. These universal symbols speak to us and through us on a primal level. We relate to them as more than their literal meaning, and we automatically understand them as both external and internal things. Fire is not just a flickering flame. It's passion, love, drive. Darkness is not just the absence of light. It's fear, threat, uncertainty, the unknown. I'm sure you've heard of the shadow self, a coined term by Carl Jung to describe the resisted, rejected, and forgotten aspects of who we are. The shadow itself is an archetype. In fact, it's one of the purest, oldest, and most archetypal archetypes, and it is also the home and the fabric from which monsters are made. Dracula, Medusa, the Minotaur, the Golem, the Sphinx, the Sirens. These figures can be understood as personifications of what we're afraid to confront or own in terms of our own psyche. and of taboos and disallowed behaviours in terms of the external rules and morals of society. Looking inwards, we might read monsters as representations of exiled parts of the personality, aspects of the self that have been rejected or denied, and that can now only wait to be seen, named, and welcomed back. Just like Beauty's Beast or the Frog Prince who needs a single kiss, when our monsters are brought out of the shadow and into the light, they can transform into something altogether different. Psychologist and storyteller Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about monstrous characters as if they are guides, doors, or road signs to our natural instincts. Parts of ourselves, perhaps, that have only gone wild because they were ignored or starved in the first place. Think of the Minotaur trapped in his labyrinth, a terrifying threat and a symbol of rage, destruction, and primitive animalistic instinct. Read psychologically, that labyrinth is the psyche, and trapped within it, the Minotaur is our repressed emotion or unresolved conflict. This monster is not, as it might seem at first, the enemy. It's the entity that was left behind. And a potent warning about the damage done by denial. Estes writes, "The wild nature carries the bundles for healing. She carries everything a woman needs to be and know. She carries the medicine for all things." The wild nature Estes is talking about here is the instinctive emotional self, a part of the inner world that can seem and feel beastly, but only because we've forgotten its language. Estes is writing for women, so her statements are gendered, but instincts and emotion are of course not only for women. No matter our gender, this world trains us from day dot to disconnect from our quote-unquote wild nature. Girls are taught to numb and quiet their feelings in order to be good and nice and amenable. Boys are taught that men don't cry or show weakness. And we're all taught that logic and rationality are king, which is another gendered archetype and one that I use here very much intentionally. The stoic, strong, dispassionate and accountable king, the one who slays monsters to protect the realm, is the persona we're taught to strive for. But at what cost? In Jungian analysis, monsters are seen as shadow figures. The parts of ourselves we repress because they're too painful, too intense, or considered socially unacceptable. The shadow, then, as the inner realm of monsters and madness, is certainly a frightening prospect. But as most of us are well aware, the darker parts of the mind are not all bad. Jung himself is very often quoted to have said, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." Monsters, I'd like to argue, are the guardians of that gold. So modern psychotherapy is in many ways a monster story. Shadow work is essentially the process of descending into your own internal labyrinth, facing the beasts within, and emerging transformed. We need to do this because when we repress emotions like anger, shame, desire, or grief, as we all do, they don't disappear, but go through a dark process of metamorphosis and reappear as monsters. Unprocessed pain becomes a ghost, lingering in the background, rattling chains only you can hear. Suppressed rage becomes a werewolf, calm by day but clawing its way out when the moon is high. Disowned desire becomes a vampire, feeding in the dark on whatever it can get. Repressed grief becomes a wailing banshee, shame a golem built from fear, ignored intuition a siren, leading you in circles, calling you to places you refuse to go. These monsters don't show up to torment us. They appear because they're trying to get our attention, because they need to get our attention. Estes refers to this as the return of the wild self, and she implores us to, quote, "Go out into the woods, go out. If you don't go out in the woods, nothing will ever happen and your life will never begin." So whether we're descending into the depths of the ocean to face the kraken, entering the labyrinth to meet the Minotaur, or wandering into the woods to reckon with the wild self, into the darkness we must go if we wish to live, to grow, to be. Because without darkness, there cannot be light, and vice versa. So before I bring this video to a close, let me ask you a couple of questions. First, this. When you hear the word monster, which monster comes to mind? Which monster has haunted you most in your life? I'm not only interested in the ones that have made you jump. I want to know about the monsters that have lingered, the ones you dreamt about, the ones that made something in you go quiet when you saw them. You might think of a creature from a bedtime story, a beast in a movie you were too young to watch, a character from a book or TV program that simply stayed with you for longer than you thought they should. You might even think of a monster from a nightmare that no one but you would know about. So what is it? Which monster comes to mind for you? Because there is at least one, isn't there? The really juicy question, if you have a monster in mind, is this. What if that monster stayed because it had something to say? What if it wasn't chasing you at all, but calling to you? If you're willing, write down the name of your monster, not to banish it, but to begin listening. Do this for yourself in private or in the comments so I can read it. But either way, remember that the things that haunt us are the things that carry meaning. To speak their names is to open a door, just a little. To invite the conversation you need to have in order to decipher that meaning. And I hope to help with that conversation too. The remaining videos in this 11-part series will each tackle different monsters and types of monster from their vast history. So will yours make the list? Let's see.